The New Zealand government is considering banning social media for kids under the age of 16. Australia already has a bill to that effect, which is coming into law, I think, next month. The only way to accomplish this is to verify the ages, or is for social media companies to have to verify the ages of all of their users, including their adult users. What are we to think of this? Is it time to panic? Are we headed towards 1984? Is Big Brother one day, because of this law, this potential law, going to be following us around every moment of our lives? Probably not. Probably it's going to be fine. And this may even be, I know, shoot me, but this may even be a good thing. And this video is going to explain why. Welcome back to the show. So this idea has been floating around for a while that New Zealand would be banning social media for kids under the age of 16. This is what Chris Luxon, our Prime Minister in New Zealand, had to say about it.
But again, our position when we take a step back is to say, look, we have constraints on our kids in the physical world, but we want to see them in the virtual world. We're very attracted to the idea of a social media ban for under 16s. The devil is in the detail, and that's why the policy work is important. I would hope that there would be other parties that would want to come on board in the Parliament to actually strengthen the protection for our kids. And I think many parties would say that's a New Zealand issue, it's not a party political issue.
Before we get into the, is this overreach, is this, government oppression, I think the first thing to talk about and to establish is that Luxon is totally right that that social media is extremely harmful and damaging to children. Everyone knows that social media gets us into some bad habits in our own lives, and we all have the thing where we know we need to stop scrolling and get out there in the real world and touch some grass in the parlance of our times. But when it comes to kids, it's a little bit more acute because, for several reasons. And I wanted to get into the data and the actual research and how we know this. It's not just anecdotes and personal experience, although it is that. Many of us are just young enough to actually have lived through the experience of having social media play a role in our teenagehood. And I can look back on that and say that was not, that wasn't a positive, it wasn't a plus to being a teenager in today's world, social media. And I think that I got through it fairly mildly. And there were lots of people I saw who were suffering a lot more than me, like girls who started self-harming themselves, even guys who started doing that. In general, people were extremely depressed and anxious coming out of being a teenager in those years, sort of 13 years ago, 10 years ago, when social media really took off. So that's the anecdote side of things. We should pay attention to the data as well. And we've actually had social media for long enough now that there actually is data on this and there is science on this, research. I want to play a video of Jonathan Haidt, who is a very well-known psychologist, social psychologist, who has published a lot of books, some of them you may have heard of. This is one of the key topics that he's been researching for several years. So let's take a look at what he has to say about the downsides of social media for young people.
It's not all mental illnesses. It's not schizophrenia. It's internalizing disorders, which is preeminently anxiety and depression-related disorders. They're pretty stable from the late 90s all the way through 2010, 2011. There's really no trend in the United States or in the other English-speaking countries. And then all of a sudden, there's an elbow, like around 2012, 2013, there's an elbow, and the rates go up very sharply for girls, with more of a curve for boys. 2011, 2012, no sign of a problem. 2014, 2015, it's off to the races. With depression, anxiety, we see the same thing in self-harm. And it was when I realized that it wasn't just America. When I saw the same graphs in Canada, the UK, Australia, something big is happening to human children, at least in the West. We don't have good data from East Asia or the developing world. But all across the West, something terrible began happening around 2012, 2013. In 2010, teenagers almost all have a flip phone or a basic phone. The iPhone exists, but it's not very common. The front-facing camera comes out on the iPhone 4 in 2010. Instagram becomes super popular in 2012. So that's the period where teen social life is changing radically from using a phone to call your friend saying, hey, let's get together this afternoon, to spending all day swiping and scrolling and commenting and posting. 2010 to 2015 is the great rewiring of childhood. And the reason why we think that that is the major cause is because first, when we look at the historical pattern, it's a correlation. Lots of things happen in 2012. We can't prove that, oh, they get on social media and instantly the girls get depressed. That could be a coincidence. But because it happened the same way in so many countries, no one else has come up with an alternate theory. No one else has said, yeah, but here's something else that happened in all these countries that would plausibly make girls, and especially preteen girls, this is important. The increases we're talking about are generally between 50 and 100% increases in these measures of psychopathology. For preteen girls, you sometimes get 200% increases. And for self-harm, 10 to 14-year-old girls did not used to cut themselves. It was very, very rare before 2012. There you get over 200% increase in hospital visits for self-harm. So the historical correlation, it doesn't prove it, but there's no other alternative. And then you have the correlation in time use. That is, the people who are heavy users of social media in almost every study are doing much worse. And then you have experiments where when you get people off of social media for a couple of weeks, only if it's more than a week, this is important. Some studies make someone get off social media for a day or two. And if you're addicted to something and you're deprived of it for a day or two, you're not happier, you have withdrawal. But when it goes longer than a week, the vast majority of those studies find that people actually feel less anxious, they feel better. So a variety of kinds of evidence were coming in by the late 2010s, and this is all before COVID, coming in that it sure looks like it's the move onto smartphones with social media.
So the argument is pretty easy to follow. It's completely consistent with my experience, with the experience of a lot of people. I think it's pretty hard to argue with that. And hate also has it's a bit of a funny name, hate, because I think that's what a lot of people get online, which is what causes, when you're at a vulnerable age as a teenager, a lot of intense negative emotion. Some people pronounce his name Height, but I think I've heard him say before that it's actually pronounced hate. One of the criticisms may be, okay, you guys are freaking out about nothing. It's not such a big deal. We always worry about what teens are getting up to and what the kids are getting up to, and we're adults, so we can't understand it. Haidt addresses this in an article, Social Media, Not the Economy, is Harming Teen Mental Health, from April 2024. For centuries, adults have worried about whatever kids these days are doing. From novels in the 18th century to the bicycle to the 19th, and through comic books, rock and roll, marijuana, and violent video games in the 20th century, there are always those who ring alarms, and there are always those who are skeptical of those alarms. So far, the skeptics have been right more often than not, and when they are right, they earn the right to call the alarm ringers alarmists, who have fomented a groundless moral panic. But the skeptics are not always right. The lesson of The Boy Who Cried Wolf is not that after 2 false alarms we should disconnect the alarm system. In that story, the wolf eventually does come. The question before us now on the topic of teen mental health and social media is this: are the skeptics correct that we are going through just one more groundless moral panic over teens and tech, in which adults are freaking out, while in fact the harms of social media are so minimal that they shouldn't be a cause for worry? Or did the wolf really arrive around 2012 and has been mauling young people ever since via their smartphones and social media accounts? If this research is true, what policy implications should follow? First, he says no smartphones before high school as a norm, not as a law. Parents can give younger kids flip phones, basic phones, or phone watches. Second thing, no social media before 16 as a norm, but one that would be much more effective if supported by laws. Then he says phone-free schools, use phone lockers or similar for the whole school day so that students can pay attention to their teachers and to each other. And then finally, he suggests more independence, free play, and responsibility in the real world. So essentially what New Zealand is considering doing is exactly what Haidt suggests. Of course, that's not just a reason to do it. Any kind of policy has to weigh up the pros and cons. And the con that is being emphasized, I've seen people really worried about this online, is that this is going to lead to 1984. It's going to lead to the government getting into our lives even more than they already are. And that's a legitimate concern, because in this day and age, technology has advanced so much to the point where governments, oppressive governments, could use it to meddle in people's lives. And that is happening on a massive scale in some countries like China, in ways that we can't even fathom. But I just want to point out that, and I'm no massive Chris Luxon fan at all, but he himself said that the devil is in the details, and they have a lot of policy work to do in order to come up with legislation that is going to achieve these specific policy goals which he mentioned, which is preventing harm for children. Does the government have the right to therefore legislate? Do they even have the right at all to do this? To answer that question, we need to think about the question, what is the government for? What's the purpose of the government? Does the government have the right to pass any laws? And if so, what laws? The purpose of the government exists for our good, for our own good. That's its purpose. It exists for our collective good, to pass laws that conduce to our collective good, and also for our individual good, because properly ordered, there's no difference between individual good and collective good. So, in theory, the government does have the right to pass these laws. And I hear the concerns that of recent years, the government has proved itself to be meddlesome, and, I said that it existed for our good, but often it seems that it could actually conduce more to our good by doing less rather than by doing more. Governments have the impulse to meddle in people's lives a lot of the time, to try and do so much good stuff. The path to hell is paved with good intentions. And often, if the government just took a step back and got out of the way, our lives would go fine and we could sort out our problems ourselves. But the other era, lest we overcorrect, we have to be mindful that it's also possible for the government to not do something when they should do something. Companies now, social media companies, are selling a product which is extremely new and, as we've discussed, has negative impacts, certain negative impacts on people's lives, especially young people, young children. The people need a mechanism in order to protect themselves from companies that would sell a product that would harm people, especially an addictive product. And I don't need to tell anyone this. Social media is designed to be addictive. That's why we regulate alcohol. That's why we regulate cigarettes, and ban these things in some cases, i.e. to children. So that's the first thing, that the government actually does have the right to, which is another way of saying that we, as a political community, have the right to restrict companies from selling certain goods without certain regulations, if we judge that it's going to harm us collectively in a certain way. We have the right to regulate them. And for better or worse, the government of New Zealand does represent the people. If this proves to be an extremely unpopular law, we can vote out the government, and we certainly will vote out the government if people hate this law. So there's nothing procedural or fundamental that means that this has to be something bad. It's a law. It's what governments do. And we don't want to live in a world where there's no government. So now let's address the other concern, which is as I said, a legitimate concern that our government, or Australia's government, may use this law as an excuse to encroach more on our freedoms. As I said, the New Zealand government has been doing that, and they put us through a lot. The COVID vaccine, taking control of the media, the meddling in the economy, all of that stuff has genuinely made people's lives worse. But I have to say that was not this government that did that. That was the socialist government that was voted out, a couple of years ago, who did all of that. And for all of his faults, Chris Luxon does not strike me as a secret authoritarian. For all of its problems, that doesn't seem like the ideology of the National Party. So there's that. And then, does this law, does it give too much power to the government? Even if the law would be a good thing, even if you're with me to this point and you agree social media is bad, okay. The government does have the right to restrict social media use for children, okay. But does this law present too much of a danger that other bad things could result from this law that would be even worse than that? Not necessarily. Australia, the ban that they've implemented is not on children or on parents, it's on the companies themselves. So the right that is being reduced is the right of social media platforms to sell their product. Well, it's a, they don't exactly sell it because they have a different business model, but to market their product and to make it available to children. Those are the people whose actions are being restricted by this law. Of course, that still means that they will have to conduct some kind of age verification. So even if the government won't have access to that data, now the days of being completely anonymous on social media are gone. Does that then just shift the problem? So, okay, maybe the government won't spy on us, but now the social media companies will spy on us. I have two things to say about that. The first thing is that not necessarily. There are plenty of companies online to which we already have to verify our identity when we're using their product. Banks, all kinds of companies. It seems whenever I have to sign up for something, I have to take a picture of my ID or my passport. So that's one. And then the second point to make is that if social media companies wanted to spy on you, and some of them do, they're already doing it. Most people don't have the security on their devices to stop companies from tracking them across websites and to gathering information about their identity. If that information that they gather was directly shared with the government, that would be a concern. But that's totally separate to the question of verifying someone's ID for social media. So I guess my point is that, if they wanted to spy on you, they already could. And some of them, especially TikTok, i.e. the Chinese Communist Party, is already doing that. And if you don't want a company spying on you, you probably shouldn't be using social media anyway. So my final word on this, I think it's a good thing. I think it's a good thing. And I think that that's something that we need to get comfortable with. I do think that governments have lost our trust, deservedly so, but this could be an opportunity for governments to win back our trust and to implement a law that actually, reduces depression, anxiety, suicide in young people and gives them a better childhood, gives them and leads to them having more time in the sun with their friends. And if they do that in a way in which they're not eroding our civil liberties, then that's a good thing. If you managed to make it to this point in the video, I hope that you found this information interesting and this perspective interesting. I hope that it maybe challenged some preconception that you might have had going into it about this law and about this idea, about this policy. It would be really good for kids if they didn't have to go through some of the stuff that kids have been going through for the last 15 years, which has been really harmful to them. And if you enjoyed this video, I'd love it if you click the subscribe button and join me for some more, some real in-depth, deep, profound analyses of some important topics of our time. So if you do, I'll see you in the next video.